A new year, and once again, a new meeting, and what to talk about. You try and link to your guides, you try and think about what you'll say. You look over the idea of talking about history, you look at philosophy, and you realise that it's a new year, let's start in a different way. It's the start of my 13th year as leader of the mission. It's a long time. I'm hoping at 13 will be lucky, given 10 with my detached retina, 11 with COVID and 12 with COVID. We're not really lucky years. We've got through them. We've done a lot of new things, but they were difficult to say the least. So let's hope as we get through this year we get to somewhere better. But I thought, how many people know what the leader of the mission means? Well, with our organisation, just like every role that people do for us, it's a volunteer role. It certainly ends up being unpaid, but it certainly costs you money over time. You end up putting your own money in, you put your time in, you put your love into it, and you try and honour what's been created by those people who've run the mission in the past. Liz for the previous 11 years to me, and all the way back to our founders, Rosina Tingey with the Greater World, and Mr. and Mrs. Davis, who founded the New Age way back in 1924. You try and honour it and remember that we have a constitution, and the constitution states that we are here to pass on the knowledge of spiritualism, to try and explain spiritualism, and try and encourage people to operate within the philosophy and the thinking of spiritualism with the 7 principles that we have. It's probably the most important part of what we do, but the leader has a lot of other practical tasks that they end up with, and it depends on how much they have to do. Depends on having a really good committee, and we've been blessed at times with really good committees, but other times we've ended up taking on more work. You're the administrator, you're the public officer for tax purposes, for legal purposes. You're the person who's registered as a leader with the ACNC, the National Charities Organisation, because we're a registered charity. You have the website, always bookings, you have an awful lot of other things that you have to do, and to worry about the building and insurance. So there's a considerable amount of things. But it's not a religious post. Our mission has never had a reverend to run it. It's almost by decision. It is a philosophy rather than a religion. We also aren't set up and don't have the funding to operate in the broader sense of other churches with what we would really love, counselling services, other assistance available to people. To be a reverend takes a lot of time, to do it properly, that is. The Spiritualist National Union of Great Britain, it's a 2 to 3 year training course. It covers counselling, bereavement counselling. It covers things like going into prisons to meet people, to give them religious guidance, which you could say mediumship. And they do have to do all of that to become a reverend. We haven't done that, and so the leader is a different kind of role in our centre. You could say you have to know something about spiritualism. Optimally, you're a medium. Optimally, you have a sound grasp of the philosophy, and you have a sound grasp of our history, of the correct history, so that you can promote spiritualism properly. That's not always necessary, but you do need to remember that is part of our role, part of the role of the mission. The mission is a spiritualist centre. It is part of the movement called modern spiritualism, a belief in God, but with Jesus not as our saviour, we are our saviours. And Jesus is a teacher, a medium, among others in history, and a healer who have enlightened or tried to enlighten our world with their knowledge. So the leadership goes back. The original two, the founders, Mrs. Davis, who became Mrs. Taylor, Sister Hilda Taylor, passed in the 1950s, and Gertrude Manier took over, and she brought a totally different look to the mission. She brought rigour, she created a constitution, she created committees, she created a trustee for the building fund with separate duties. Our only link back to them was at those times was really the man who persuaded me to actually become leader, Robert Johns. I wasn't intending to replace Liz. There was somebody who really wanted it, but other people weren't so sure, and many on the committee asked me to stand, and so I was persuaded to become leader more by accident. And it's interesting that prior to that, I had obviously become involved in spiritualism purely because I met Liz. And Liz drew me into the organisation because she was then working platform in London area. And so that was back in 1983, 84. So I've now been involved with spiritualism. This is my 38th year. So it's a long time to be involved in a movement. I became immediately drawn into healing, and attempts to get me to try and become a medium took a lot longer. But I've been working as a healer even at the centre when Liz, last year was meant to be our 25th anniversary of our healing clinic. Liz founded it on her own in 1996. And she kept a record, a book of the healers who helped her, and she had people who'd come in and try and help. And every time I had a break, I would come and work, and my name's in the book which she kept of all the healers in 1996. 1997 I became the auditor of the mission. So it's a long time even being involved. But it was around about 2004 when I was running groups and involved, and we had a medium, Vera Hollands, who was a very good English medium who lived up in Gawler, and she'd come and work for us, and she'd been trained in England, and she worked in the way they used to in England in the 80s. Sometimes a medium would always be there to give you a message that gave you proof of survival. The first message I received in 1983 was what convinced me of the value of spiritualism. And like the message in 1983, after they'd given that message, they suddenly said something from a person in spirit, a guide. The guide told us in 1983 that we should be getting married, and there was a child waiting. The guide in 2004 told me, or 2005 told me, your guys are very pleased with what you're doing, but you don't know enough about spiritualism yet. And I thought I was doing pretty well. I was working the platform, I was chairing, I was running a group, but I thought about that and I started to learn more about spiritualism. It was the push that got me started. It was funny really, because we had 500 books on spiritualism in the house. We got 500 old books rescued after the mission. Our own centre, when it left its old building, parted company with the library, and Rosa Tingey had taken, when Liz was walking past a second-hand bookshop, Rosa Tingey got her to go into the bookshop and rescue her books. And although we were then short of money with Sam just having been born, she managed to do a deal to save a large chunk of the books. We think it's only about 20% of the library, and we have them here. And since then I've also built up about 750 e-books, and I've been involved in researching history, finding new things out. Liz has been doing it for years, but I was joining her on that journey of growth and knowledge. And now there's a huge amount of material available around the world. We've got friends in research, and Mark Demarest and his group have rescued a lot of spiritualist books, newspapers and books and magazines. And the Psychic News archive is now freely available to people. There is a huge amount of information people can gather to find out the truth about spiritualism and to realise that we have a lot to offer. And that's part of what the leader's role is, to let people find out where to go and look for things. My own personal interest in research and writing, and Liz's, means we will always be doing more than anybody needs to in this particular role. But it's a love, it's a passion, and it's something that's important. So I thought I'd just share briefly the thoughts of what it's like to be a leader. It's a very demanding role. It's a role that's an honour. It's a role which requires respecting, and it's a role that requires a lot of help from the committee members, which lucky I get. I think at that point I'll leave there. There's a lot of thoughts in there. Maybe there's no one constrained strand to follow, but maybe people will think around it, and you might want to ask questions at some time. And I'll leave you with that. Thanks.